there's a good reason why, the conversion rate of people that search for the latest iPhone is high. It's because they're searching it because they're going to buy it. If you were to take, vendor claims at face value in the marketplace, you could imagine that AI has fundamentally transformed the attribution space, and that AI now enables for perfect attribution. And I don't think we're there, and I don't think we're close to that.
Hello there, and welcome to Mythbusters, where we break down how AI technologies are revolutionizing advertisement and bust a few myths along the road. I'm Javier Campos, CIO of Fenestra, which is a programmatic automation platform and author of AI book, How to Grow Your Business with AI. This week, we are going to discuss attribution models, past, present, and AI-powered future. And the myth we will be busting is, can AI instantaneously provide perfect attribution models? I'm delighted to be joined by Laurent Colard, Senior Vice President from VideoAmp.
Thank you, Javier. So, as you know, I've pretty much spent my entire career applying attribution and broadly speaking, data science to media measurement and media optimization. So this is very much a topic that is close to my heart. I started in the late 90s with a focus on econometric modeling and marketing mix modeling applied to media. I did that initially more in a consulting capacity. I then realized that, consultants talk a lot about what should be done, but they don't actually do it. So I moved to media agencies because I thought, who other than the biggest media agencies, makes decisions about billions and billions of dollars every year. So I moved to GroupM, helped GroupM develop its global analytics infrastructure, learned a lot by doing that. So the evolution of the attribution landscape. And then for the last 10 years, I've been focusing more on pure technology startups that leverage technology and data science to better measure and optimize media. So I love the topic, and I'm really excited to discuss it with you today.
So I hope the listeners come with us in this journey. So before we can actually debunk the AI myth, can AI fix all this and do magic attribution and perfect attribution? We do need to go into a bit of a history trip to understand why attribution has evolved over the years. And if we can start there, just going down memory lane. So how did the sort of historical attribution model is evolved? If we go back in the 60s, 70s, where TV was very important, how the attributions have evolved from there all the way, and also during your career, especially to the last few years.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, I was not quite doing econometric modeling in the 60s and the 70s, but funny anecdote, I started my career in the late 90s in London in a small specialist company that was called OHAL. And OHAL was one of the first companies to apply econometric modeling to the measurement and the optimization of marketing investments. And they actually had started doing that in the late 70s. And I still remember when I went to the OHAL offices, and we would sometimes, go into the archives, and literally when OHAL started building econometric models, in those days, they were typing out reports using typewriters. They were drawing charts by hand. So I kid you not, we would take reports, and there were charts that someone had to draw the dots on the reports. It was that old. And they literally had to use modems to write programs and send the programs to a mainframe overnight.
Wow.
To get the results of the program the next day, the result of which was an econometric model, right? So it's pretty unbelievable when you think about how long econometric modeling has been applied to the measurement of marketing and media. And I think what was fascinating at the time is that those models, certainly in the 90s, were actually surprisingly sophisticated already. So, for example, the measurement of TV within those econometric models was accounting for reach and for frequency. and carry over, and for recency of exposure. So
Wow.
a whole series of topics that are still very, very relevant today. And literally now, almost 30 years ago, those models were already being employed and had actually been developed at that time for several decades. And I think it's fascinating around attribution is, in a way, how much it has changed, and yet at the same time, how much it hasn't over that period of time. Now, obviously, what has evolved tremendously since then is the granularity of data, uh, the media landscape, the fragmentation of media, right? The fragmentation of platforms and audience, the multiplication of tactics, the appearance of alternative forms of attribution measurement, right? Multi-touch, single touch, leveraging experiments. But fundamentally, back in those days, the models were not that dissimilar and were, in my mind, surprisingly sophisticated already.
What led to the shift from single touch to multi touch attribution models?
Yeah, I can really draw back to my experience when I was in GroupM with you. And obviously, uh, what led to that was the digital revolution in media, right? And very simply, with digital media, everything changed to a large extent. Uh, Not only the ability to specifically target specific audiences and smaller audiences, but also to record both media exposure and consumer behaviors that are associated to those media exposures, right? And obviously, the initial forms of single touch attribution really came, in my experience, from the early stage digital platforms like Google, for example, right? That was very successful in not only tracking impressions and clicks, but also then to track conversions and associating those conversions with exposure. Obviously, that was very powerful at the time, and it was a very big part of Google's success as a media platform. But obviously, those methods of attribution uh, also had some very significant shortcomings. One of them being that, well, Google measures conversions driven by Google, and then Facebook tracks conversions driven by Facebook, and so on. But those are not deduplicated, meaning that the same conversion, right, the same user purchase could be claimed by Google and by Facebook and by Twitter and by the DSP, and obviously that is not very accurate at all. And the other thing is that those platforms and those methods of measurement don't account for incrementality. For those that are less technical, what incrementality means is that the fact that a purchase can be tied back to an impression does not imply that that impression or that the ad exposure caused the purchase, right? And especially for search, very often you search for something because you want to buy it in
Yeah.
the first place, right? And so I would say what really led from single touch, right, platform driven conversion measurement to multi touch is the need to both be able to deduplicate conversions and purchases across all of the various media platforms in which advertising campaigns are run, and also to be able to measure incremental conversions, not just the total number of conversions, because that's a lot more accurate.
I think as a note, and I'm sure that people will hear a lot about incremental when we talk about CTV, which probably is for the focus, but on CTV, when you have all these different media consumed in different ways, you need to be very careful when, especially if you compare with the traditional metrics of the linear TV. So that incrementality is very important. Okay, so I think you mentioned a couple of times. So what are the major challenges? You mentioned some on the data fragmentation, where what happened where uh, I will say competing platforms have data which I know from my Kantar days on the measurement side that many cases they don't want anyone else to mark the homework. And in a school what happened when pupils mark their own homework. So what would you say the key challenges? I mean, you mentioned a couple of the data fragmentation and also this commercial competition and sort of walled gardens, which it keeps happening. Now, for example, with TikTok, and every time there is a new platform, and that is happen. And at the end of the day, as to your point, marketeers care about the end-to-end picture, the omni-channel. But how do you? What would you say the main challenges are?
Yeah, so there's, I would say that there are challenges related to, generally speaking, the evolution of the media marketplace, and then there are some challenges related more to data availability and the ability to collect all the data to analyze that media. So media fragmentation, generally speaking, has been a big challenge for attribution, meaning that 30 years ago, probably 80% of budgets went into a TV campaign. That TV campaign ran for 3-4 weeks, and the role of an econometric model was to measure the aggregated sales impact of that investment. And quite frankly, if the campaign worked, it was not very difficult to measure. It could increase your sales by 10%, 15%. That was not that difficult. What happened since then, obviously, with digital media is that digital media became incredibly more fragmented and precisely targeted. And now it's very common for campaigns to run, 100 or hundreds of different tactics at the same time in 10 different platforms. And so obviously that creates uh, a lot more smaller things to measure. And all these things are running at the same time. And obviously that makes the task of measurement a lot more complex because of the fragmentation of media and the fragmentation of audiences. On the back of that, collecting data to produce those measurements has become harder, especially, I would say, over the last 10 years, partly because of privacy concerns and legal constraints, and partly because of consumer behavior. So from a privacy standpoint, more and more of the largest digital platforms has started to claw back sharing some of their data for measurement. And data that could be somewhat easily accessed 10 years ago is much harder to access today because of privacy concerns. And then in terms of consumer behavior, obviously there's been the emergence of ad blocking, there's been the emergence of ad-free options, which either prevent users from sharing the data or even prevent users from seeing ads in the first place. And I would say all of those dynamics have made it, in my opinion, more difficult to do the type of multi-touch attribution across all platforms that we were talking about a few minutes ago, because getting the data in one place has become harder and harder. And I would say that's really been a big area of development over the last few years.
Absolutely. And the other thing which is worth adding, and also want to get your comments, is about the cookie disappearance, which even when people talk a lot about it's gonna disappear or not, but the reality is, if you are in Safari or you have you have an iPhone, which by the way is a lot of people with sometimes the more sort of affluent, the sort of higher incomes, they haven't had cookies for quite a while. Those will also, I guess, represent a challenge on the attribution models, right?
Yes, absolutely. And I would say I'm not an expert in this space, and I put that caveat because it is a space that requires a tremendous amount of expertise. But in response to those challenges, there's been a lot of development around data clean rooms, for example, where effectively publishers like Google and Facebook and many others make their data available, but in a sandbox where the data cannot leave that sandbox. And very often they make that data available at various levels of aggregation. It could be a zip code or cluster of households, and it creates a lot of technical complexities, which in a way move us away from the one-to-one world where you can really match one exposure to one conversion, right? And in a way, it brings us back to more aggregated forms of measurement, right? Where you cannot really match individuals. You now need to match clusters of households. And I think that those evolutions in the marketplace have in some ways led to a bit of a resurgence of more traditional forms of attribution measurement, like econometric modeling, also known as marketing mix models, MMM.
How would you say the challenges for the sort of attribution modeling to be able to effectively measure the success of the campaign? And we have sometimes talking to, and this is now from Fenestra point of view, we have clients that sometimes they struggle to get the right KPI and how to measure. And there is also another challenge with the data is in different places. You have usually your DSP running the campaign, but then some of the data you might have it in systems like 360, or sometimes you have it in your CRM, your call centers, and actually what happened more often than not, and it would be good to get your view, is when you start making sense of all these things, sometimes things don't quite make sense, and you have a metric in DB360 might be low, but then your call center is not doing that. And so I think what would you say about these challenges?
Yeah, my experience is that, first of all, a surprisingly large number of brands and advertisers still rely on what we sometimes refer to as being platform reported conversion. So an example of platform reported conversions would be Google tracking the conversions that Google generated, right? And even though it is common knowledge that there are issues with those types of metrics, like the ones I was describing before. You're double counting across platforms. It's not adjusting for incrementality. There is an incredible amount of reliance on those metrics to make very big investment decisions. And those decisions are either being made by media buyers in the platforms, right, in Google Ads or in the DSP to make buying decisions, or increasingly over the last few years to let the platforms auto-optimize their campaigns on behalf of the buyers. Now, the platforms can only auto-optimize campaigns based on the metrics that they have access to, right? And the challenge with that is that those metrics, quite frankly, are just not very accurate. And there's a good reason why. What's a good example? The conversion rate of people that search for the latest iPhone, or the people that search for a very specific product name, is high. It's because they're searching it because they're gonna buy it, right? And same for retargeting. There's a good reason why a lot of people that get retargeted for an ad after they put a product into a shopping cart end up buying it, is because yes, they had put the product in their shopping cart in the first. It is not rocket science, but those basic metrics that are available in those platforms do not account for these things. And yet, very, very large investments decisions are being made based on those metrics, and it results into suboptimal investment decisions. Now, why is that the case? Well, it comes down to the challenges of more robust forms of measurement. What are those challenges? Well, first of all, they're expensive. Not everybody can afford them, right? Not everybody can afford an advanced MTA or custom media mix model. They are infrequent, right? They're updated every so often. They tend to take time to produce. So, if you get your campaign results a month late or a quarter late, well, guess what? I'm already halfway through my next campaign and I can't wait, right? So I would say cost, granularity, recency tend to be challenges associated with the more advanced forms of measurement. And as a result of that, in my experience, still a lot of decisions end up being made based on lower quality metrics that at least have the benefit of being readily available, always up to date, and people use what they have at their fingertips.
How does the integration of multiple forms of measurements, a bit like the sort of composite measurement, how does that improve the attribution accuracy?
Yeah, this is an area that I've been very interested in now for a few years, and I've personally done a lot of development in this space. So when you think about it, when you take a step back, and especially if you work in the space of media, you quickly realize that pretty much all brands and all agency teams today have access to a variety of sources of performance measurement, right? Uh, Examples of that could be, oh, I have platform reported conversions. All D2C companies and businesses have largely access to that. And if they don't, they have access to proxy metrics like clicks or views or reach, right? And most advertisers that have a reasonably high level of sophistication will have more advanced forms of measurement. So they might have an MMM, right? And the cost of MMM has been decreasing over the years, and the prevalence of MMM has been increasing. Or they might have an MTA model. We personally work with a lot of brands that have both an MMM and an MTA and platform reported conversions. And then a lot of sophisticated advertisers run experiments, right? Geo tests or audience targeting tests or suppression tests or test versus control or pre versus post. And a lot of publishers will fund studies, brand lift studies, right? Sales lift studies. And so what happens is that the media professionals, the planning teams, the account teams, the in-house media teams are left with all of these different signals of performance, and it's largely down to those people to know how to connect the dots between all of those various metrics and translate that into investment decisions that yield the best possible returns for their brand. And the reality of it is that that is not a small task. It's not a small ask. And media people, in my experience, are very sophisticated, very knowledgeable, but they don't all have PhDs in mathematics to know how to connect the dots between all of that. And what is interesting is that why would they use a variety of metrics and not just one? Well, it comes back to the pros and the cons of all of those, right? Your quote unquote lower quality metrics have the benefit of being available all the time, the next day, at a granular level, free of charge, right? Your more sophisticated metrics have the benefit of being accurate, but usually they're expensive and they're delayed and they're infrequent and they're aggregated, right? And you can't afford to have that all the time. And even if you could afford it, it probably wouldn't be available as fast and as granular as you'd like it to be. So my belief is that the idea of combining all of those various sources of measurement into a unified framework, both for evaluation purpose as well as for decisioning purpose, is the right approach, meaning you want to get the best of both worlds. You want to get the learnings of incrementality for your MMM and take those learnings and apply those learnings to your day-to-day metrics so that you can account for their flaws, meaning applying deduplication factors and applying incrementality factors to metrics that you get natively out of platforms, and then use those adjusted metrics for decisioning purpose.
There are some open source out there, some of them, which is, I would be quite interested to hear your opinion of, again, the concept of the marking your own homework, but the major and in this case players like Google and Meta. Well, Meta has this open source like Prophet and Robin for quite some time, but Google just launched, I think it's last week or 2 weeks ago, a new MMM. So I would be curious to hear what do you think about this.
Personally, I'm a big fan of those developments, and I think that they've been doing a great job at democratizing access to more advanced forms of measurement in a way that is, privacy safe, in a way that is more, sustainable on a go forward basis. And I think that it's, any development in this space and anything that makes the availability of those tools, more, broader, is a welcome development. I also think that by virtue of those solutions being made open source, I think that, the most sophisticated users and developers have access to the code and can understand, the logic of the code and make sure that they're satisfied with the methodologies being used. So I personally am not overly concerned about the marking your homework. The one thing that I would say, which I think is an interesting area, is that certainly reading more recently about Google Meridian, for example, I was reading about the fact that solution has uh, natively preferential access to certain Google metrics like YouTube reach frequency, like search query volumes, which is powerful, but at the same time does raise a question of whether adopting such tools as your primary basis of evaluation means that, you know, the Google owned media properties have preferential access. I wouldn't say in the algorithms themselves, although I have not reviewed those algorithms, but in terms of preferential data access, that increases the likelihood that Google would gain a greater share of wallet as a result of that. But I mean that said, I think that these are very positive developments and ones that are helping democratize access to those more advanced forms of measurement, which in turn can only help improve the method by which media budgets are evaluated and optimized.
In which ways do you think composite measurements addresses the challenges of these walled gardens?
Yeah, so the the idea behind a composite measurement plan is that you try to get the best of both worlds. And I talked a little bit about this before. You have certain metrics that you can get every day for the previous day. Those metrics are readily available. They're in your buying platform, right? They're easy to act upon. They're cheap, but they're just not very accurate, right? As we know. And then most brands have access to those more expensive, more accurate forms of measurement, but on a less frequent basis. And so the idea behind those composite measurement plans is to effectively get the learnings of the more advanced measurement methods and apply those learnings to the metrics that you get in your platforms to effectively account for their limitations. So, for example, an example I've used a lot in the past is, well, you might be in your Google Ads console and you might be looking at your various campaigns, and you might be seeing that the cost per conversion of your branded campaigns is on average 10 times cheaper than the cost per conversion of your generic search campaigns or your conquesting search campaigns. And even if you know that that's not very accurate, it's very tempting,
True.
to put a little bit more money towards the branded campaigns, right? If you can spend more, why not, right? Now, the challenge with that, as we all know, is that there's very high saturation, there's low incrementality, but on the surface, maybe you're going to increase your cost per acquisition of branded campaign by 10%, 20%. It's still cheaper, right? So obviously, it's human nature, right, to take action on the metrics that are in front of you. And so the idea is to use the learnings, for example, of an econometric model and look at the estimated incrementality of those various types of campaigns. And maybe those model will tell you that, sure, for every conversion that is generated by your branded campaign, only 1 in 5 of those is incremental, whereas for every conversion that is generated by your, social campaign, all of them are incremental. And then you can use those learnings applied to the metrics you get in platform, and then make decisions based on the adjusted metrics, not the platform reported metrics. So that's the concept of those composite measurement plans, and using those adjusted metrics for near real-time decisioning that is still a lot more robust than just taking, the simple conversion metrics at face value.
So we're now gonna go into the sort of final section, which is in trying to debunk some of the myths. So I think here, well, double question, but the first one is, what would you say is the biggest myths about AI and attribution modeling? As we know AI is these days pretty much every day on the news in many areas. Like all technologies, when there is a lot of hype behind, sometimes some people might be a bit too ambitious on the claims. So I will be curious to see which one is just for, from when you talk to clients to the ecosystem all the time. What is the biggest myth that you can see?
I certainly would say that if you were to take, vendor claims at face value in the marketplace, you could imagine that AI has fundamentally transformed the attribution space, and that AI now enables for perfect attribution all the time. And I don't think we're there, and I don't think we're close to that really at this point in time. Um, my experience with AI applied to attribution, and if any listeners think that I should be aware of certain developments, I'd love to hear from them. But what I've seen is really primarily using AI to automate the development of models that use somewhat traditional techniques, for example, MMM. So back to open source libraries, right? I believe that both Meta's Robin tool as well as Google's Meridian tool use AI in some capacity to automate the calibration of their marketing mix models in a way that brings a lot of automation, removes human bias, can use prior measurements to help calibrate the models, all of which is great. But it's really using AI to automate the calibration of relatively old attribution methods, as opposed to fundamentally changing how it is that attribution models work.
Absolutely. I think just to build on that comment, one of the things about AI, which when you explain it, it makes sense. AI needs, surprisingly, not surprisingly, but actually people forget about this, needs good data and data. And if you don't have the data because the data is not in the right place, you don't have access because a platform commercially has decided you shouldn't have access to that, or because they are, for many different reasons. If you don't have the data, the AI is not going to be able to do what it can do. So I think that is which in here, as we discussed just before, as one of the challenges of attribution model is sometimes some of the key data we don't have it. Sometimes, and this is why these composite measures try to do. To your point, sometimes we don't have it because it's too expensive, because it's not there, because commercially it's not there. I think we debunk and whenever this is the for the listener, whenever someone tell you about AI does whatever claim, one of the things I always ask is always ask about what is the data, what is the data coming from that you've done this model. So what are areas, as well as the one you mentioned, which is a good one to use AI parts of the process to automate it and the calibration in this case of the model. Can you see any other areas where AI can help the current attribution, and how do you see the future of what are the good areas of AI that can move? So I think it would be good if you could spend some time. What do you think the major trends in attribution are going to move over the next couple of years? And I know it's a difficult question because there are many moving pieces, in terms of what's going to happen with the cookies when they go, the fully go, the measurement, identity, so that there is quite a lot of broad there, but it would be good if you can give us a few of the trends.
Yeah, I think there's two topics that I'm personally interested in, and I have not yet seen a lot of developments in. But again, nobody sees everything, so the fact that I have not seen it doesn't mean that it's not happening. The first one is really the convergence of what I was describing as composite measurement plans and AI, meaning that my experience so far has been that AI has primarily been used to automate the development and the calibration of, somewhat traditional measurement methods that are getting, a resurgence for many valid reasons, right, as in MMM. I think that it would be very interesting to see how AI can better help users develop and analyze those composite measurement plans that I was describing, and effectively be more proactive in signaling to users the metrics that matter and why they matter, and when they're changing, what to do about it. Because the reality of it is that with the growing number of platforms, of metrics, of formats, of audiences, no human being can really condense it all, analyze it all at the speed at which the marketplace supports. And so, generally speaking, using AI not so much for automation of backward-looking measurement, but more for automation of alerting and decisioning, leveraging multiple signals and multiple metrics, I think is a fascinating space in which I have not yet seen a lot of progress. The other thing that I think is very interesting is potentially being more leveraging AI to signal to users or media professionals new potential investments, new potential audiences, new potential formats, new potential partners and platforms. The thing with measurement-centric solutions, it's in the name of it. They measure, and you measure what you've done, right? You look backwards and you learn from the past to predict the future and optimize accordingly. That creates tunnel vision. And I think that there's a lot of interesting work to be done to be a lot more proactive in recommending new things. And I think that AI is very well suited for that.
Well, thank you so much, Lauren. It's been fascinating. You have an incredible career, and it's been great. You can share that with all our listeners. So I just wanted to really thank you very much for the time you spent here with us today, sharing all these things, and fascinating area, which I can look how AI can help this going forward. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. Well, Javier, thank you for having me on your first podcast episode. And it's great to see you. And that was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Well, that was great to catch up with my old colleague Lauren in New York. There is so much in that conversation to think about it. Let's go through the main three takeaways. First, history of attribution model. Driven by changes in the media and marketing landscapes, evolved from very basic to intricate models like multi-touch attribution to navigate the complex digital marketing space, allowing for a better grasp of the customer's online interaction paths. AI role and challenges. AI improves attribution by automating and refining the process, but requires comprehensive data. Challenges such as data fragmentation, privacy concern, and platform-specific measurements still are ongoing barriers. The future of attributions will blend AI alongside composite measurement strategies and open-source marketing mix modeling, MMM. These advancements aid to unify disparate data sources, offer real-time insight, and democratize sophisticated analytics, enhancing decision-making across marketing channels, pending data and privacy challenging solutions. So, did we bust the myth that AI can provide perfect attribution models? I think these conversations underscore that while AI and advanced analytics has transformed attribution modeling and will do more, they are not cures-all. AI, at its core, needs good data, and the fundamental challenges of data fragmentation, platform silos, and privacy restrictions continue to complicate attribution efforts. Success in attribution modeling hinges on a nuanced understanding of these dynamics, leverage AI where appropriate, but also recognizing its limitations and the ongoing need for human insight and strategic oversight. Thanks for listening to Mythbusters, and we'll see you next time.